Wilson Lumpkin, as you see, was a native of Virginia, but he came with his family when he was just a very young child to Oglethorpe County, Georgia, and lived there for the first years of his life until he was a young man. And then he entered public life and lived in many places in Georgia. And this was his retirement home after he thought that he was through with his public life. However, he was twice called out of retirement to do public ventures after he built his house just across the valley here. You can't see it now, but when Oconee Hill Cemetery was laid out here, there was not quite sufficient land for what was then called the colored burial ground, our African American section of the cemetery, or the pauper burial ground. So Wilson Lumpkin gave part of his plantation for that use, and in return, he took the top part of West Hill, where I'm sitting here. And he moved the grave of his son, who was a star student at the university at age 18, and suddenly was sick with an illness that took his life in a few days. So he moved this grave up to the top of the hill where he could stand in his back door and look across and see the son's grave. And you can continue to do that until 1957, when Sputnik came along. And the state of Georgia, in response to Sputnik, built the science campus at the University of Georgia. And now those buildings interfere with the view between these two locations. Wilson Lumpkin held many important positions in the state of Georgia. He was an excellent executive officer. He was governor of the state. He was a congressman. And then after he was retired, the state of Georgia was building a railroad. Two previous railroads had been private ventures, but this was a government venture, and not to surprise anybody, it went bankrupt before it was completed. So the state called on Wilson Lumpkin to take it out of bankruptcy and finish it, which he did. This is the railroad that created two cities, Chattanooga, Tennessee, at Ross's Landing on the Tennessee River, and Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta at first was called Marthasville after his daughter because he declined to have it named for him. He said that there was already a county named for him, but the man who was giving the land that was going to become Atlanta said, well, then what about naming it for your little daughter, Martha? So that is how it first got the name Marthasville, which it did not keep for long. And Martha did not like the fact that it changed. And so she said that her middle name, well, that her daddy really called her Adelana because she was so swift of foot as a child, and that he called her that after the goddess of the chase. So when she was a very old lady, she borrowed back the family Bible and interlined an A for Adelana in the Bible. And while she was doing it, she got 2 years younger because she closed in the top of a 7 and made a 9 out of it to make her age closer to that of her husband, whom she had married late in life. Martha loved to say that Atlanta was named for her twice. But Governor Lumpkin finished that railroad, and he was going to have to advertise for an engineer from out of state to do the tunnel through Tunnel Hill, Georgia. And this so embarrassed one of our lawyers here in Athens that he asked the governor of Georgia not to advertise out of state, that was an embarrassment to the state of Georgia to have to bring in somebody from outside our boundaries, and that he was a civil engineer and that he would just get the books on how to tunnel and he would do it. And so one of our local lawyers, William Letcher Mitchell, put the tunnel through at Tunnel Hill. And that's all because Wilson Lumpkin was living here and knew him. And he set them to boring on either side of the mountain, and when they met, they were only a ½ inch off bore. That is pretty amazing for that time in history. So this man, although his other call back to public service earned him a dark blotch on his reputation today, is one of my heroes. The dark blotch came because the Indians needed to be removed from the state of Georgia. The white settlers were just encroaching on the Indians terribly, and Lumpkin realized that their only hope was to be removed, and he led the removal, which today is known as the Trail of Tears, and makes him terribly politically incorrect. But I think we need to judge people in the context of their times. On the reverse side of this marker, it lists many of his public attainments, and it says that he died full of years and of honor. He was, I think, 70 when he died. He died in 1870, so he was 86 when he died. His estate had been decimated by the effects of the Civil War, and he was survived by a widow and this unmarried daughter, Martha. So whatever money remained had to be used for their upkeep. So his grave was not marked when he died, and it was not marked until 1918. He died in 1870. 47 years later, his great-grandson, Chancellor David Crenshaw Barrow, saw to the marking of this grave. And if you were to go over and look at his rock house, at Lumpkin's rock house, which he was his own architect for, and which he wrote, I have tried to put some of my character into these stone walls. When you look at that house and then you come look at the monument that his great-grandson designed for him, you can see that they echo one another. And it's a very fitting monument, although it was 47 years in coming.